One of the most exciting developments in avitourism in South Africa in recent years is the launch of the GoBirding platform. This project was driven by BirdLife South Africa with support from the Chamberlain Foundation and inputs from some of the country's best bird guides. BirdLife South Africa strives to encourage birding and a love for birds within the South African public, and this project promises to do just that. BirdLife South Africa's avitourism project manager, Andrew de Blocq, will tell us more.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this presentation and for the opportunity to present on the GoBirding platform, South Africa's brand new one-stop avitourism portal for everything birds and birding. My name is Andrew de Blocq. I am the avitourism project manager at BirdLife South Africa and the manager behind this new project, which I firmly believe is going to catalyze the avitourism economy here in South Africa. To begin with, I'm going to give a little bit of background about avitourism in South Africa, some context for why GoBirding was a necessary and attractive project for us, and then I'll introduce the project itself, taking you on a bit of a walkthrough of the website, and finally I will touch on where we want this project to go and what the future will look like for GoBirding. And I'm going to tell you up front that this is going to require your inputs, because this is a platform built by birders for birders, as you will shortly find out, and we want to keep updating it and growing it as we go, which requires everyone's inputs from when they're out birding, updating the site, giving us fresh information, letting us know what your sightings are, and also joining the South Africa Listers Club. Alright, into the presentation then. So it's worth asking the question at the offset, why are birds such a successful vehicle for tourism? And firstly, why is BirdLife South Africa involved in tourism? We are a conservation NGO, of course, but also what are we doing to develop and support avitourism in South Africa? Well, South Africa has over 870 bird species, which is about 8% of the global diversity worldwide, which is pretty incredible for a country right at the south tip of Africa. And of course, there are nearly 70 species that are found nowhere else. In other words, there are endemics or near endemics that are almost unique to South Africa and spilling over slightly in some cases to our neighboring countries, such as Lesotho and Eswatini. Avitourists in South Africa, according to a study which I'll introduce just now, take longer trips and travel further into undervisited areas than other tourist types in the country. And I think more importantly, for those who are the bean counters in the tourism department, they tend to spend more. So they are of a wealthier, usually older demographic, especially those that are traveling from outside South Africa to see our incredible bird life. The key demographic, as I said, is middle to upper income mainly. These are important demographics to the tourism industry because they have generally disposable income and also the time to travel. Generally, their professional careers are winding down or indeed over, and they're looking to enjoy all their savings that they've built up over time. And birders can be absolutely fanatical travelers traveling all over the world. And South Africa, because of those endemic and near endemic species, is really high up on the list of countries that birders, international birders, want to visit. Of course, they also travel to areas that are not traditional tourist destinations. Of course, there is good reason for a birder to visit Cape Town, for instance. It's the basis for the 6 fynbos endemics around the Cape and some other wonderful birding sites. But no one in their right mind, unless you're a birder, is going to Aggeneys or Pofadder. But birding has the propensity to take people there. So it's a very key niche tourism sector in South Africa. There are both strong inbound and domestic markets which underpin this, and I think for reasons that I'll go into just now, that has even been bolstered post-COVID. And of course in South Africa, this niche tourism aspect, if you can call avitourism niche, is supported by other ecotourism infrastructure. South Africa obviously has a very well-known safari tourism culture, and is known worldwide for our wildlife and other forms of ecotourism, whether it's the big five or the whales in Hermanus or the flowers in the Namakwa or Tankwa areas. We have an incredible array of ecotourism products, but also infrastructure that supports that, which also plays into the success of avitourism in South Africa. So in 2010, the Department of Trade and Industry was looking into various forms of niche tourism in South Africa, one of which was avitourism, and they commissioned a study to be done by my predecessor here at BirdLife South Africa, Martin Taylor, to look at what is the avitourism market like, putting some numbers to this, what are the drivers behind the avitourism economy, and what are the other aspects that people should be aware of. And they came up with a number of quite interesting statistics. The first of which is that the total size of South Africa's current avitourism market is between 21 and 40,000 tourists annually, of which domestic avitourists number around half. So that's interesting for me, and I think since 2010 when this was published, or indeed 2009 when the data was gathered, in the past 13 years, I think birding has seen an incredible boom worldwide. It's been quite well documented in the US and the UK that this is the fastest growing outdoor hobby or pastime, and I'm absolutely sure that South Africa is experiencing a similar rise in birders and people interested in birds. Avitourism's annual contribution in this report was reported as between 1.2 and 2.25 billion rand per year. So just to put things in perspective, tourism brought in somewhere around 3% of GDP, but was one of the fastest growing sectors pre-COVID. So it is a government focal area, and avitourism has the potential to contribute huge amounts towards that overall ecotourism contribution to the economy. As I said, avitourists are one of the key demographics. They tick multiple boxes in terms of traveling for very long, traveling to areas that don't usually have tourism spend, and also spending more while they're here. So certainly an important demographic to tourism in South Africa. And I think also importantly, and this is something that we as birders know and also strive to uphold, avitourism generally has positive environmental and conservation impacts if it's practiced properly and birders behave the way that they should. For example, by signing up to the tenets of BirdLife South Africa's Birders Code of Ethics, then certainly there can be positive environmental and conservation spin-offs. That we are constantly encouraging those tourists and birders who are visiting South Africa to contribute, for example, to BirdLife South Africa's projects or to citizen science projects such as the Southern African Bird Atlas project. So I think definitely avitourism is one of the cleaner and greener tourism aspects available in South Africa. So I've now introduced the avitourism market in South Africa, and I think you'll agree that it's quite a strong and promising one. But what are the opportunities that exist inside this market, and how do we unlock it? So the market in South Africa is largely untapped, despite it being quite a strong performer. And I believe this especially to be true of the domestic market in terms of organized avitourism engaging South Africans traveling within South Africa. And I think COVID gave us an opportunity to, in the tourism industry, to look inwards, where many people in the tourism industry were dependent on outside investment and outside visitors. When COVID hit, it forced us to look inwards at our own market, and we really realized the value of South Africans supporting South African tourism infrastructure. So hopefully that grows. And as I'm going to get to, the South African avitourism market is also lacking organization. BirdLife South Africa is one of very few players within this. There are a number of very well established birding specialist tour operators, but outside of that, there's not a lot of developmental support or developmental organization within the sector. So there's definitely an opportunity there to strengthen that. As I mentioned, birding is a fast growing interest, and I think especially post-COVID, and some of the reasons for this are that when people were locked in the confines of their four walls, or perhaps with their gardens as their only area to get out and about, in inverted commas, people turned to birds to satisfy their urge to connect with nature, and people started realizing how many different species and what variety of birds were available in their own neighborhoods, and indeed in their own gardens and in the nearby green spaces where we were eventually let out to walk a little bit further than our own dwellings. So we've seen an incredible boom in the number of people interested in birds, and I think the BirdLife South Africa Facebook page, which has grown 50% over the last year or so, just shows us that people are flocking, if I can use that term with a pun intended, to birds as a way to connect with nature and a way to explore and get outside and reap all those benefits. Birding, as I said, can also bring tourism income to rural and undervisited areas, and this gives us an opportunity to engage local communities and to position them as the beneficiaries, but not only the beneficiaries, also the drivers of local tourism in their areas. And that's what we at BirdLife South Africa strive to do. I asked the question a bit earlier of why BirdLife South Africa is involved in tourism, and I think that's the real key. Our avitourism project is positioned within our Empowering People program, and I think the wording there gives you an indication of our objectives with the avitourism project. BirdLife South Africa is not competing with the various professional tour operators. I don't think that's our niche. We're a conservation organization, but we also want people to be aware and to appreciate birds, and that has spin-off benefits for their conservation. And tourism is one way to reach people. So it's a way to use birds and tourism to empower people, quite literally, to create jobs, to create opportunities, and to create greater connections between South Africans and our magnificent diversity of birds that we have here. So what is BirdLife South Africa doing with regards to avitourism in South Africa? Well, we have quite a number of initiatives, some of them within the avitourism project and under my umbrella, and others not. But I'll go through a few examples here before we get on to some of the bigger projects. In February 2020, we founded the South Africa Listers Club. So in South Africa, those of you who are local birders will be well familiar with the Southern African listing sub-region. For those who are not so familiar, birders in South and Southern Africa quite typically keep a Southern Africa list as opposed to a country list, which to me is quite odd, but it has its genesis in the early explorers who kept their records for Southern Africa and produced books and texts that covered the birds of Southern Africa, and we've kept that tradition going. You'll notice all of our field guides, the major field guides on sale, all refer to Southern Africa as opposed to South Africa. But South Africa has, as I said, over 870 birds, and Southern Africa has around 990. So any South African birder, the bulk or majority of their list is going to be within South Africa. So we, being BirdLife South Africa, took, and our mandate being South Africa's birds, took the decision to launch a South Africa Listers Club. And the idea is to engender a proudly South African approach to birds and birding in South Africa. We want people to fall in love with our own birds and to support their conservation, and this was the platform we chose to do it. So we provide that service in terms of a listing club. We have our African BirdLife magazine, which we produce. BirdLife South Africa publishes this magazine, but it's written and distributed all the way through Africa, and it's one of the most renowned birding magazines worldwide, and probably one of the best nature-based publications on the continent, and something we're really proud of. And of course, this comes as a membership benefit with BirdLife South Africa in the form of a subscription. We have our Conservation Conversations webinars, which we regularly have 400 to 500 people tuning in every Tuesday evening, and we've run now close to 110 episodes on this platform, covering all different topics from birding in national parks to the conservation of birds and the various projects going on around South Africa and further into Africa. And this is a great way to make people more aware of birds and birding in South Africa. We also run the odd event, and one of the examples of this is the Kruger Birding and Wildlife Challenge, which we undertake in aid of the critically endangered white-winged flufftail. And this is done in partnership with the very well-regarded and extremely successful rock jumper birding tours run by Adam Riley, one of the probably South Africa's greatest birding exports, if I can put it that way. Although he's still based here, they now have operations all over the world. So occasionally we will run these events, and they will have a birding focus and give people opportunities to, for example, access areas or access guides that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. Then we have our shop for the birds, and this is located at Isdale House as well as online at shop.birdlife.org.za, where we have everything that birders could possibly need. And then lastly, there's the African Bird Fair, of course, which you're all watching right now. One of our big projects here at South Africa, and certainly one of our longest running and most impactful projects, is our Community Bird Guide project. And you can meet the guides at the Bird Fair by visiting that session and watching some of their videos and hearing their stories. But without stealing their limelight, the project's been going on for just over 20 years, and there's been over 200 beneficiaries of our training courses, and all of our 50 guides on the GoBirding site are graduates of our Community Bird Guide project. So an incredible project where we take people from rural underprivileged backgrounds and equip them to become professional freelance bird and nature guides, and some really lovely stories coming out of that. The birth of some real conservation ambassadors and conservation heroes across South Africa, such as these three men here. From left, Paul Nkomane, Samson Mulautsi, and David Letswalo, three of the directors of the Limpopo birding route. So some wonderful success stories and some real African bird experts that have been birthed out of this program. Then there's also our recommended accommodations tour operators and course providers. So they used to be branded as our birder-friendly establishments and tour operators, but about 2 years ago we rebranded this for it to become the BirdLife South Africa recommended members. And these are avitourism service providers who've been vetted by BirdLife South Africa, and we therefore promote them to South African and visiting birders. There's a certain number of criteria relevant to each of the different categories to make sure that not just anyone gets this prestigious label with the BirdLife recommended logo, but now we have about 70 accommodations across South Africa that we recommend to birders, and a number of tour operators and a growing number of course providers, two of whom are presenting at the Bird Fair this year. Those being Lance Robinson and Dr. Aldo Baruti. So we're making wonderful strides in this network. So where did the idea for GoBirding come from? Getting to the real meat of this presentation. So I took over the avitourism project about 3 years ago, just under 3 years ago, after moving on from the seabird conservation team. And I inherited a number of really incredible projects. I've mentioned the community bird guides and what was then called the birder-friendly establishments network. However, we hadn't had a dedicated avitourism project manager for around 12 years before I took over this position, which was created again as part of a restructuring and placed within the Empowering People program. So when I started, I decided to pull in some of the most experienced people in this sphere into a strategy workshop for my new project, which we were now taking on at BirdLife South Africa. And I casually mentioned at the strategy workshop that I was so lucky to having inherited these projects and also the birding routes, which had been launched about 10 or 12 years beforehand. And I just said that it's a real shame that we don't have a way to tie them together. There's very little way for someone to know if I want to go to, say, the Zululand area north of Durban, for instance. I can go onto the guides page and find the guides who are listed under KZN, but I've got to flip through each of their profiles to find where they guide. I don't know what are the sites near to them that I might be able to visit, or what species are available. Similarly, if I want to know where to stay, well, I've got to exit the guides page and go to the accommodations, search through KwaZulu-Natal. So the projects didn't really speak to each other. And I thought, well, and I mentioned at the workshop, well, I think, in the longer term, I think we should be thinking of ways to integrate this, and probably digitally is the way to go. Everyone's on websites and apps now, and it would be great if we could just tie these together in some way, probably with a map. And Darby Chamberlain, one of our board members and strong supporters, and a fanatical birder himself, pictured towards the bottom right there next to Mark, he just unmuted himself and said, Andrew, I think you're right, and I think we need to do this. And he managed to find the money for a donation, a very generous donation, to get this project up and running. So thank you to Darby for believing in this from the get-go. And I must say this is as much his vision as it ever was mine. So why do we need an avitourism platform? As many of you will know, South Africa is very blessed to have some of the most incredible birding field guides ever produced. The detail and depth of these field guides is just amazing, and are the envy of countries all over the world. And included in this are a few, but very limited resources on where to go birding in South Africa. So there are the Southern African Bird Finder book, which is quite famous, and the How and Where to Photograph Birds in Southern Africa, which is perhaps less known, but still a fantastic resource. And then when the Roberts Bird app was launched, there was also the Birding Sites widget at the bottom left there with the binoculars, which had a list of sites and some information, but there's no currently integrated source of information on birding. There's no indication in the Southern African Bird Finder of what are the best places to stay, where are the local guides, what are the directions to the site, and those kinds of levels of details. Also, that book was, I think, written close to 15 years ago, and sites change, new places are discovered, security risks develop, sites are added and fall away over time. So there was no updated information, and it's a static form in a book. So we thought there's a niche in South Africa for something that brings all these different facets of avitourism together. And so we set about putting this together, and it took just around 2 years to pull it all off. This because mainly I'm a one-person team here at BirdLife South Africa working on the avitourism project, but also we had the restraints of COVID and the pandemic, which ironically gave us time to pull this together because travel was restricted. And one of the silver linings of the whole pandemic and travel being basically banned, I guess, is that we were able to use out-of-work professional bird guides as our provincial coordinators. So I'll feature them on the next slide, but we were able to get some of the top birders in South Africa to supply the base of the information for the site, which is an incredible privilege. And also we were able to pay them something for their efforts in a time which was very, very difficult for everyone in tourism, and particular guides who didn't have any groups traveling to South Africa that they could guide. These different coordinators for each of the provinces did a gap analysis of the current birding routes, looking at which sites needed updates, which sites needed to be dropped, and which sites were missing in each of the provinces in which they were experts. I then provided them templates and guidelines to make sure that each of the sites looks and feels the same and has the same level and quality of information. They went away and sourced text, mostly writing it themselves, but also asking others in the birding community to contribute. And they also sourced images for the site. And then we set about building the site in the background. This was quite a process in itself if you consider that each of the individual birding sites, each of the guides, each of the accommodations requires its own web page. So this was a massive tree of web pages to build into one coherent site. And then we loaded all of these up and put it together and polished it off, and then launched it in May 2022 at the BirdLife South Africa AGM on the 24th of May. And so, as promised, here are the 7 people that oversaw the provincial coordination for GoBirding. I think it's valid and right that we give them thanks here. Martin Bernardi of Wilderness Safaris put together the Northwest and Free State provinces. Vincent Ward of Birding Africa put together the Western Cape. Daniel Dankwitz of Rock Jumper Birding Tours put together KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape, as well as the Limpopo province. So Daniel was very busy, and you can catch him at a couple of sessions at this year's Bird Fair as well. Mark Crenier from Nature Travel Birding, he put together the Mpumalanga province. Justin Nicolau from Unearthed Safaris did the Northern Cape. And last but not least, John Kimhorn and Tony Geddes of Expedition Birding put together the Gauteng portion of the site for us. So those of you who are well acquainted with the birding glitterati here in South Africa, I think will be suitably impressed by the caliber of people we managed to bring into this project. And our sincere gratitude to them, especially from me personally, for the incredible effort that they put in. And I think it really shows in the quality of the site and the information that they provided. And then before we get onto the platform itself, there's just 2 last people to thank, and those are Natasha Shilobane, who was my intern for the first 6 months of this year, and she put an incredible amount of effort in the background to pull this off in terms of the web editing and other admin associated with the project. So thank you to her. And certainly not least, but last, Jacques Skeppers, our science design web fundi, who built the website as well and is a constant source of ideas and innovation around the different features on the GoBirding site. And we were incredibly lucky to have Jacques on board. He is also a birder, which of course helped when it came to understanding the functionality of the site and how best to give the users the experience that they need. And so, without any more delay, I would like to introduce the newly launched and very exciting GoBirding website platform. And so here we are on the GoBirding platform, which you can access if you'd like to at www.gobirding.birdlife.org.za or simply gobirding.co.za. And this is what you will be greeted with, our brand new website. Here's a little bit of an intro to the project. We have various tabs up here, which I'll go into shortly, but the meat and drink of the site, if you scroll down, is this incredibly lit up integrated map. So each of these blue pins is an accommodation, a birding site. The green pins are accommodations and the orange pins are our local guides. And in total, there are over 520 pins on this site, each of them with their own dedicated web page and a whole lot of information backing up each of these pins. So like I say, it's been a long time coming, but that's the reason for it. There's a hell of a lot of work that's gone into this and a hell of a lot of information that's been stored behind each of these pins on the site. So let me give you a couple of examples of how this would work. Perhaps you are from outside of South Africa coming for a conference in Cape Town and you'd like to do some birding around the mother city. Well, what you would do is you would zoom in here on the Cape. Here's the Cape Peninsula, and you can start playing around with where are the different birding sites. So, for instance, this pin takes you to the beautiful Kirstenbosch Botanical Gardens. Or if you wanted to come down here exploring, you could find the Strandfontein Sewage Works. Yes, sewage works are beautiful spots for birding. And if you came down all the way down here, you would find the Boulders Beach site. Now, Boulders Beach, as this blurb here says, is one of only 2 mainland-based African penguin colonies, and therefore one of 2 places that you can reliably see penguins. And perhaps you'd like to go and find that out. So you click on this click here for more information, and that'll take you to the dedicated web page for Boulders Beach, which has a gallery of photographs, some indication of what are the important species that to look out for, Of course, African penguin is foremost amongst those. Some contact details, other information like the main website. And then each of the pages has these 3 sections, which is about the birding, which gives you some indication of how to go about birding. You'll see there's GPS pins scattered in here to make it as user-friendly as possible. And then there's about the birding site. So for instance, many people might not know that this site was first colonized in 1985. So it's a relatively new African penguin colony, in fact. Then there's other related information here that can include anything from directions to the tariffs to get into the site, opening hours, access for people in wheelchairs, and all other possible information that you could want. So that's what these pages all look like. If we go back to the home page, you can now see why, I'll just quit this, you can now see why this took so long to put together with so much information. So here's another example. Perhaps you'd like to go and visit one of our local community bird guides, and there's quite a few of them in this area around KZN. So perhaps we'll go look here. And you would like to go see the eastern bronze-necked pigeon, which, as all South African birders will know, the best place to see that is in Glenza Forest near Eshowe. So let's zoom in there, and you'll see there's a number of different community guides here. So there's actually 4 of these pins, and here is the Glenza Forest pin. So we'll open that up to have a look. Again, it's going to have exactly the same format as the Boulders Beach page. Here we go. Here's the managing authority. Here are your key species. Again, eastern bronze-necked pigeon right at the top of the list. The contact details, some extra photographs, and then these same 3 sections. So here's some beautiful information for you to use when out birding at the site, other information around the birding site in the general area, and then some related information that people might want to take heed of. So what are the main entrance GPS points, accessing facilities, accommodations nearby, local guides, etc., etc. So if we go back to the main site, okay, we've decided we want to go to Glenza, to the aerial boardwalk there, which I highly recommend, by the way. Well, there's 2 community guides that operate right here, apparently. So let's see who they are. Here's Mabui Zungu. Mabui actually works at Glenza Forest. Let's have a look at her profile to see what that looks like. Here she is. She's got her picture, her name, where she operates, the contact details, and then some of the guides, about 20 of them, have marketing videos as well, which you can watch here on YouTube. So you can meet Mabui before you even book her services. So that's how it all works. And again, I'll just zoom out here so you can get an idea of how it all looks. I think the best way to explore the site is just to play around, log in, and start clicking around, seeing all the different pins. Yeah, checking that your favorite local patches are included. If they're not, let me know, and I'll definitely send you a template to fill in. And yes, this is the new GoBirding site. So that is the map. I'll quickly take you through the pins at the top here. So there's an About Us section, which is fairly self-explanatory. Gives you a little bit of an introduction to BirdLife South Africa for those of you who might land on the page organically and not be aware of our organization. Then there's a news section, which is what we're building up, a repository of information for birders visiting South Africa. So what are some of the best birding spots in our national parks and in our major cities? Who are community guides and our recommended accommodations? How to choose binoculars? And we're going to build this up over time using posts from BirdLife South Africa staff, as well as various guest authors writing about their specialist subjects. So, for instance, I have a post by Trevor Hardacre on its way about what to do when you find a rare bird. And Mike Buckham is writing a post on why you should join your local bird club. So there you go. This links away to the South Africa Listers Club, which I was telling you about not so long ago. This links to the BirdLife South Africa shop for everything you could possibly need as a birder. And then there's a donate button as well. So this site at the moment doesn't have any revenue-making possibilities. So we're going to rely on donations to keep it going for the short term until we find a revenue model or we get a headline sponsor. So that's the GoBirding site. I encourage you all to log in. Again, the details are www.gobirding.co.za or .birdlife.org.za, and that'll land you on this fantastic new avitourism website that we just launched this year. So I'm sincerely hoping that after that introduction to the platform, that those of you out there will be as excited as I am to get out and explore the site and explore the different areas that have been featured. I certainly believe that this is a much needed and welcome tool for birders both in South Africa and visiting for their planning their birding trips and their excursions and outings. So again, thank you to the team that pulled it together. I'm going to finish off now on where we're going with the site from here. This is a work in progress. I think it's a wonderful tool as it is, but we don't want this to be a static project. The value of having it on a web platform is that it could be continually updated and improved and broadened. So we do have quite a few plans in this regard. The first is that I would love there to be more accommodations listed in our network. There are so many examples of incredible places to stay that service birders and are situated in some of South Africa's most incredible birding destinations and areas. So please, if there are any accommodations that you believe should be on that map, please do get in touch and put me in touch with those accommodation managers and owners. It will help us to promote them to the birding tourists in South Africa. You may also notice that we don't have photographs for all of the sites. So please, if you are going out to visit a site, take a couple of snaps, send them my way so we can include them on the platform. We are not looking in this regard for pictures of birds, but rather landscapes, habitats, entrance gates, and other possibly useful areas that people visit when they do go to these sites. We're also looking to list new sites. Our expert birders have put a rather comprehensive list together, but there are gaps, and we would like people to submit sites to us. There's a template that I can provide anyone who wants to do a write-up for a new site. And then we want to include guest articles. So we want to build up a repository of information and resources for birders in South Africa under our news or blog section. So if you do have something that you're particularly passionate about or an expert in, we would love to have your guest articles. Second to last, we'd love you all to get the word out. This platform is there for people to use. It's free, it's available, and we want people to use it. That's the idea behind the whole project. So please do get the word out. And I think in future, in the longer term, we are looking at possibly making this an even more interactive site, including things like community bird guide tour bookings, bookings of accommodation, perhaps other sort of commercial aspects that are missing at the moment, but that'll all be with an eye to with a view to servicing the birding community, both domestic and inbound. So thank you for listening to the presentation. I hope that you do go out and use the site and basically go birding. That's the whole idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for the presentation. The site is truly phenomenal and promises to catalyze the avitourism economy in South Africa. I hope that our audience is inspired to get out and go birding. Next up on this feeder is a feature on BirdLife South Africa's community bird guides, some of the most well-loved and respected characters in the birding community.